Hey there, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept or a strategy that we use in autism fitness programming to make life better, to make fitness programming better, to have outcomes that really matter, that are meaningful and effective for you and your autism and neurodivergent athletes. And before I get started, please definitely subscribe, and share this video with someone for whom it might make a difference, whether they're just starting out their fitness programming journey or they've been doing it for decades. We provide insight that is going to work. Now, as far as our topic today, I'm going to be discussing the three different strategies or three different setups that we use in an actual standard autism fitness program. Now, the interesting thing about programming is it's one of that and motivation and behavior support are probably vying for the top questions that I get from professionals and parents. Like, how do you set up a viable program that's going to have the outcomes that we want for our athletes? Now, let's start with that. So with respect to outcomes, what do we want to achieve through fitness programming? And in general, we want to develop strength, stability, and motor planning that is going to generalize or transcend the gym or clinic or whatever setting we're using for our fitness programming into activities of daily living, into the real world. And the way that we do that is we develop lean muscle mass and strength and motor skills that can be generally applied and that have use outside of exercise. What does that mean? These standard movement patterns: pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging, and carrying, used in a few different exercises, but really the main goal is to have the athlete master the motor control and the technique by getting stronger and practicing the same movements over and over and over until they're capable of performing those movement patterns in various different situations and environments. So in order to do that, we have to have something that is called a program. This is a structure by which we are going to introduce and deliver and coach our athletes through each exercise. Having a free-for-all, like anything else, so random attributes and a random approach, is no surprise going to get us random results, if any results at all. I'm not considering nothing as a result here, but I guess we could. In order to have an achievement, we've got to be strategic in the way that we implement each exercise. It's not enough to just say, okay, we have a bunch of exercises and let's do as much as possible, because that is not, nor will it ever, get us to our goals. So we prioritize exercises in a way where the outcome is much more likely. So we have three different ways that we set up a structure for a program, and we can do this over sessions, we can do it over weeks, we can do it over months. For some of our athletes, it barely ever changes, except for the fact that they progress in repetitions and weight and technique, but the same format is always present and completely appropriate and appreciated by them as well. You know, continuity, right? They expect the same thing over and over. They get the same thing over and over with a couple little minor tweaks and changes as needed, and it works out really well. So what are these three strategies or three programming templates, you might ask? Well, it's a good question, because that's what I've been talking about for the past 2 or 3 minutes. We have straight sets, we have supersets, and we have circuits. And these are the three different strategies, and we can use them all within a single session. Some of them have a few benefits over others, but they're very situationally dependent, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So straight sets is do a set of an exercise, a squat, an overhead press, a push-up, a heavy carry, rest for as much time as is needed, and then repeat again. And typically we do this for anywhere from 3 upwards of maybe even 5 or 6 sets, especially as an athlete is developing the motor planning and is not yet at an independent level with the exercise. Focusing on more sets, 5 or 6 is fine. We typically don't see at that level an athlete really getting too fatigued because the load or the challenge level of the exercise is not so intense that they're going to get very physically fatigued, especially with ample rest or adequate rest. So that's not a big issue. Where a straight set is going to be helpful is if we have an athlete who wants to do just one exercise at one time and not get overwhelmed. It works really well also for athletes who are a little more advanced and they do a set of push-ups at 6 or 8 or 10 repetitions and they really need that full minute rest, and then they come back, they're already dialed in, meaning that they have their kinesthetic awareness or their mind-muscle connection going, and they're really focused on that particular exercise. Straight sets are a great option here, particularly, again, if you have a more advanced athlete who's done a few warm-up sets and now they're working up to their working weight for that day. The second option is a superset. A superset is where we go back and forth between two exercises. We can do a squat and a push-up, or a squat and a band pull down, or a squat and a cable row, or a cable row and an overhead press. Supersets are really good for individuals, like one-to-one sessions. They can also work really well for groups if you have a dyad or even a triad. So if you have two athletes and one is doing their overhead press and one is doing their standing band or cable row, this can work really, really well because you can coach each athlete at the exercise they're currently doing. And you can also modify or progress the exercise for each athlete. So if you have an athlete who can press a pair of 10-pound weights overhead, and you have an athlete and your second athlete can only press 6 pounds overhead, then you don't need to say, well, we're just going to do 6 pounds because both of you can do that. No, we can make sure that each athlete is at the current level of challenge that suits them the best and is going to be most advantageous for them. So we can also use a superset for a one-to-one session when we have an athlete who does really well with a little bit of variety in between different exercises, or an athlete who has a tendency to either get dysregulated or wander in between sets of an exercise. We also use supersets to great benefit when we have a time constraint. So if you only have 35 minutes once a week to get in as much quality movement or quality exercise as possible, then a superset is a great option because you can go to the overhead press and then you can go back and do the standing band row. And because we're using antagonistic muscle groups here, so with the overhead press, we're using pressing muscles. With the standing band row, we're using pulling muscles, so you have more anterior in the pressing, you have more posterior in the pulling. It becomes a really good option. This way we can get in as much quality movement as possible in that short duration session. So if you only have once a week, usually supersets are the way to go. Much better use of time, and the athlete can recover from that first exercise while they're doing the second exercise, and of course when they're transitioning between exercises as well. The third option that we have are circuits. Circuits work best for groups. So when you have 3 or 4 or even 5 athletes at a time, they work really well when you are running an adapted PE class, for example, and you set up stations around the room. And you can have your sandbell slam station, your push throw station, your squat station, your push-up station. The advantage of doing circuit style with a group is at any one point, every athlete can be participating in a meaningful and individualized way. Again, we can scale each exercise. So you can have an athlete who's doing overhead presses with 2 pounds, an athlete who's doing overhead presses with 4 pounds, an athlete who's doing overhead presses with 8 pounds. You can scale up, you can scale down, you can progress, you can modify depending on which athlete is at that station at one time. So not everybody has to be doing one thing. Therefore, we can set individual goals even in a group setting. The other nice thing about circuits is that every athlete is going to have multiple sets of each exercise, so they are continuously practicing each of these exercises, so we're not necessarily running out of time if an athlete has, 2 more exercises or 3 more exercises to do. Speaking of that, if you have an athlete who needs extra time, so they get frequently dysregulated, they need more breaks, the action or the activity doesn't stop just because that athlete is not currently participating. Everybody can still meaningfully participate in the program. So it does really well as far as timing and structure, because we can make sure that each athlete has what they need and is where they need to be at any one given time. With circuits, one of the wonderful things, especially if you're working with a group of differing abilities. So in Autism Fitness, of course, we use the PAC profile, physical, adaptive, and cognitive. Whenever you have a group, you're probably going to have mild to significant variance in different profiles: physical capability, motivation and engagement, and cognitive capability as far as communication and receiving of information, informational processing, those sort of really important things that you need to know that, by the way, you learn when you become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro. Link is down there. But one of the nice things is you don't have this bottleneck as well with a circuit, meaning you don't have athletes who have to wait for instruction and then wait their turn for a long time. You're utilizing time as effectively as possible in a circuit, because at any one given moment, somebody can be at one station or another station. So circuits are a great way to set up for sessions of I'd say 3 or more athletes. And you can also use them interchangeably as well. So you can start out with a superset with 2 or 3 athletes and then move on to a circuit. It really depends what works best for that particular group. So again, we need to have a standard programming model for all of our athletes. Otherwise, it's just chaos and we're just moving around. And there's a big difference. And we talk about this in the Autism Fitness curriculum. There's a big difference between just moving around a lot and having a comprehensive and actually effective exercise program. Moving around a lot is fine, but you're not going to have the same outcomes as if something is structured with that athlete's particular goals in mind, and a way to get to those goals as well. That's how we're going to develop those strength, stability, and motor planning skills that actually generalize to activities of daily living. Really important. So when you are strategizing and coming up with this plan, it may take a couple sessions to figure out what works best for each athlete. You can have an athlete who's very rigid, and once you have a session structure locked in for them, that is it. That's the way it's going to go for the foreseeable future. But a couple best practices that we want to take into account are giving the athlete choice in terms of which exercise they're going to do first, second, third, so they can construct within reason and in a way that makes sense in their curriculum. So it's not so rigid that we are dictating every single exercise in order. We do want to prioritize the exercises that are going to be most advantageous for that athlete. So for example, if the athlete presents with low tone and core weakness, and I put that in air quotes because their diagnoses, I guess, but they really just mean general lack of strength and some motor inhibition. So we can use the same exercises. We just need to figure out how we need to modify that so the athlete can perform it as best as possible right now. So once you've done your PAC profile assessment, again, something that you get as an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, then you can figure out how best to structure the program with some input, of course, from the athlete in terms of choice of exercise order, and then figuring out what works best for them. Straight sets, supersets, a combination of the two, and then with group programming and classes, highly recommend that we start out with circuits so that each athlete can get the exercise at the progression or modification that they need, so they actually develop the skill instead of just moving around a lot and then saying, well, they did this or that exercise. They did this or that exercise at what current level, and then what is the next step? What is the next goal? So in order to achieve those goals, because yes, there is something called exercise science, and yes, there should be beneficial outcomes, something that we call training effect. In order to have an actual training effect, what do we need? We need a structured program. So those are three ways: straight sets, supersets, circuits. Those are three programming structures that we can use in order to meet those goals, depending on the PAC profile of that athlete, how they're what their level is at physically, adaptively, and cognitive in general, but specific to each particular exercise in this session in general. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment in the comment section below. And of course, if you have a topic that you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training, leave that in the comments below also. I love answering these questions. And if you are ready to join the movement for movement and become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro anywhere in the world, we have our 2026 course dates up for the full day practical. So the way that it works is you register and you begin your online coursework. There are hours and hours of video and tutorials on programming, positive behavior support, assessment, the concepts and strategies that are absolutely critical to know. And then you meet me or one of our master level pros, either virtually or in person, for your full day hands-on practical, because fitness is something that we need to practice in order to be capable of delivering the highest quality programs that, of course, you and your athletes deserve. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you very much for watching.